It was a warm evening in the city, the kind of evening where the streets feel alive even after the sun has gone down. Street lights glowed softly on the sidewalks, and cars moved slowly in the heavy traffic. People hurried past one another, some heading home after work, some stopping at food stalls to grab dinner, and others just enjoying the evening breeze. The neighborhood was busy, but not unusually so. In the middle of this ordinary evening, a small argument broke out on one of the side streets. Two men had been quarreling loudly, their voices rising above the hum of traffic. A few people stopped to look, curious about what was happening. It wasn't anything unusual for a big city, arguments were common. But that night, one particular officer happened to be patrolling nearby. The officer was tired. His day had been long, filled with small incidents that kept his nerves stretched thin. He had dealt with endless calls, difficult people, and the pressure of knowing that at any moment, something unexpected could happen. When he heard the raised voices, his training and instincts kicked in. He walked quickly toward the crowd, his heart racing a little, his mind already preparing for the worst. When he arrived, the crowd had grown. A few bystanders were trying to calm the men down, but the tension was rising. The officer's eyes darted around, scanning the scene, trying to read the situation. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. It was his job to keep everyone safe, to stop things before they spun out of control. Just then, a woman stepped forward. She looked calm, almost too calm for such a heated moment. She spoke in a firm but gentle voice, trying to ease the situation. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't panicking. She simply told the men to take a step back and cool down. Her presence seemed strong, like she had handled difficult moments before. But to the officer, already tense and exhausted, her movement felt unexpected. In that instant, he misread her intentions. He thought she was stepping into the middle of the quarrel to make it worse. He thought she might add fuel to the fire instead of calming it. His mind, clouded by stress, saw a possible threat where there was none. The moment was brief, just a few seconds, but it felt longer to him. The crowd grew quieter, watching carefully. The woman held her ground, confident and steady. And then, in one impulsive reaction, the officer acted without pausing to think. The air grew heavy with shock. People gasped. The street fell silent, and all eyes turned toward the woman. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She didn't lose her composure. Instead, she stood tall, adjusting herself slowly, her expression calm and unreadable. There was something about her stillness that made the moment even more powerful. It was as if she had been through challenges before, and nothing could break her balance. The officer froze, realizing instantly that something was wrong. His heart dropped. The crowd's eyes pierced into him, their expressions filled with disbelief. For a second, it was as though time had stopped. His breathing grew heavy, and his mind raced with 100 thoughts at once. The woman reached into her bag. People held their breath, unsure of what she was about to do. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out a card. It wasn't just any card. It was her identification. She held it up firmly, her eyes never leaving the officer's. The officer squinted, trying to read it in the dim streetlight. And when he finally saw the words written on it, his chest tightened. She wasn't an ordinary woman caught in a random street argument. She wasn't just another bystander trying to help. She was someone far more significant. The letters on the card spelled out her position clearly. She was the leader of ICE, the very person in charge of one of the most powerful agencies in the country. The silence in the crowd deepened. People whispered to one another, their phones still raised, recording everything. Some eyes were wide with shock, others filled with curiosity. The officer's face turned pale. He wanted to speak, to explain, but his voice wouldn't come out. The weight of his mistake pressed down harder with every second. The woman looked at him steadily, her expression calm, almost too calm for what had just happened. She didn't lash out. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she simply said a few measured words, words that no one around could forget. Her tone carried authority, and her presence commanded respect. The officer's mind replayed the moment over and over, wishing he had paused, wishing he had thought before acting. He stood frozen in regret, realizing that his career, his reputation, and even his sense of judgment could all change because of this single mistake. The crowd around him watched with a mixture of sympathy and judgment, unsure what would happen next. That evening, the city street was no longer ordinary. What began as a small argument had turned into a moment that would make headlines, a moment that would teach lessons about responsibility, quick decisions, and the weight of authority. For the officer, it was the beginning of a journey of regret and reflection. For the woman, it was another test of her strength and leadership. The night continued, but for everyone who witnessed it, that one moment stayed alive in their minds. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what it meant. A simple mistake in judgment had revealed something much bigger, something that would unfold in ways no one could have expected. The street was still buzzing with shock. People had their phones out, whispering to each other, unsure if they should step closer or stay back. What they had just witnessed felt unreal, almost like a scene from a movie. The woman, calm and steady, held her identification firmly in her hand, while the officer stood frozen, his face pale, his heart racing. The crowd began to murmur louder. Some shook their heads, others whispered in disbelief. A few voices rose above the rest. "Did you see that? Do you know who she is?" They pointed at the card she held. The news spread through the small group of onlookers quickly, almost like a spark running through dry grass. "She's the leader of ICE," someone said in a hushed but clear tone. The words carried through the air and made the officer's knees feel weaker. He had been trained for years to read situations, to act responsibly, to make choices that could stand up to scrutiny. But in that single moment of stress and misjudgment, everything felt like it was unraveling. His training didn't prepare him for this. His mind couldn't stop replaying the way the woman had calmly shown her credentials, as if silently reminding him of the weight of his action. The woman, still calm, looked around at the crowd. She noticed the phone's recording, the whispers growing, and the officer standing stiff as a statue. For a moment, she said nothing. Silence can sometimes be more powerful than words, and in that silence, the officer felt his world shift. Finally, she spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but firmly, with authority. Her voice was clear, steady, and controlled. She told the crowd to give space, to step back and allow the situation to settle. Surprisingly, they listened. One by one, people began to put a little distance between themselves and the scene. But their eyes never left her. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The officer's fellow patrol partner, who had been standing a few feet away handling the two men who had been arguing, rushed over. His face showed confusion mixed with worry. He glanced at the woman's identification, then back at his colleague. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. He knew what this meant. The woman then turned to the officer. Her expression wasn't filled with anger, it was something else, something harder to face. It was disappointment, mixed with a quiet strength that made the officer feel even smaller. She asked, in a calm but pointed way, for his badge number. Her tone left no room for refusal. The officer swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he gave her the information. The crowd, still recording, knew that what they were witnessing was bigger than a simple street argument. This was a story that would spread quickly, a story that would reach the station, the media, and perhaps even beyond. The patrol partner gently touched the officer's shoulder, a silent signal to step aside. The officer did, his chest tight with regret. He wanted to explain, to say that he had misread the situation, that his long day and his fear had clouded his judgment. But no matter what words he thought of, none of them seemed enough. The woman did not raise her voice. She did not embarrass him in front of the crowd. Instead, she told the patrol partner to escort her to the station for a private conversation. Her calmness was startling. It was as if she had already decided that shouting wouldn't solve anything, that the real conversation needed to happen away from the flashing lights of phones and the whispers of strangers. As the group began to move toward the patrol car, the crowd followed at a distance, still buzzing with excitement. Some people were already uploading their recordings online. Others were talking loudly about what they had just seen. For them, it was an unbelievable moment, an officer making a mistake with one of the highest-ranking leaders in law enforcement. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. The officer sat stiffly in the driver's seat, while his partner tried to focus on the road. The woman sat in the back, still calm, her face unreadable. She looked out the window as the city lights flickered by. For her, this wasn't just about what had happened on the street. It was about something bigger: the image of authority, the trust between officers and the public, and the responsibility that came with every decision. At the station, news had already traveled faster than they could arrive. Officers at the front desk exchanged quick, surprised glances as she walked in. Whispers filled the hallway. Some officers quickly put their phones away, pretending to look busy. Others leaned toward each other, quietly asking, "Is it true? Did it really happen?" The officer who had acted so rashly felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him as he walked in. He wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear from the stares and whispers. He had always been proud of his uniform, proud of the work he did, but now he felt exposed, as though the very symbol he wore had turned against him. The woman walked with quiet confidence, her step steady, her expression firm. She wasn't here to create drama or chaos. She was here to address the truth. When she requested a private room, it was arranged immediately. Everyone understood who she was, and no one dared question her authority. The officer was asked to sit in the waiting area while arrangements were made. He sat down slowly, his hands folded tightly together, his mind spinning. His heart thudded in his chest. Every second felt heavier than the last. He could hear his colleagues whispering behind him, though they tried to keep their voices low. His ears picked up fragments. "Can you believe it? What's going to happen to him? This is serious." Meanwhile, the woman made a few phone calls. Her voice was calm but firm, her tone professional. She didn't use anger. She didn't rush. She simply laid out the facts. To her, the situation was about more than personal feelings. It was about accountability, about setting an example, and about showing that even those who wear the badge must be held responsible for their choices. For the officer, the minutes stretched into hours. Every sound in the station seemed louder: the ringing of a phone, the clicking of a keyboard, the shuffle of papers. His mind kept returning to the street, to the moment where everything went wrong, to the way her calm eyes had looked into his. He felt as though he had let down not just himself, but his profession, his community, and even the very principles he had sworn to uphold. Finally, he was called into the private room. His legs felt heavy as he stood. He could barely lift his head as he walked in. The woman was seated at a table, her expression composed. She motioned for him to sit. As he lowered himself into the chair, the room felt both too large and too small at the same time. The air seemed thick, and his throat dry. He tried to find words, but none came. The silence stretched, and in that silence, his regret deepened. The woman finally spoke, her voice measured, calm, and steady. She asked him to explain. Not in front of the crowd, not in front of his colleagues, but right here, face to face. She wanted the truth, not excuses. She wanted to understand what had led to his mistake. The officer looked down, his fingers trembling slightly. For the first time in years, he felt completely unprepared. His training had always been about control, about taking charge of a situation. But here, in front of her, he felt stripped of all authority. All he had left was honesty, and he knew that honesty was the only path forward. That night at the station, as the city continued its restless pace outside, a quiet but powerful moment unfolded inside those walls. It wasn't just about one mistake. It was about accountability, humility, and the realization that sometimes the hardest battles are not on the streets, but within ourselves. The waiting room outside the private office was quiet, but inside the officer's heart, there was a storm. He sat across from her, his head lowered, his voice caught in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't even look at her. The weight of the day pressed down on him, his mistake, the crowd's whispers, the endless recording phones, and now, the silent authority of the woman sitting in front of him. She didn't rush him. She simply waited, her hands folded on the table, her eyes steady. There was something in her calmness that made the silence heavier than words could. The officer finally lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with regret, and began to speak. "I misread the moment," he said softly, his voice shaky. "I thought she was stepping in to make things worse. I thought." He paused, the words dying in his throat. "I was wrong." The woman didn't interrupt. She listened carefully, her face unreadable. She wasn't interested in excuses, she wanted honesty. And he knew it. "So," he continued, "I've been working long hours. I've been tired. I've been on edge. Every call feels like it could turn into something dangerous. Every situation feels like it could go wrong. Tonight, I acted on fear instead of judgment. I let the stress decide for me. And now," his voice broke slightly, "now I've made the biggest mistake of my career." The silence returned. His words hung in the air, heavy and painful. His chest tightened as he waited for her response. She finally spoke, her tone steady and even. "Do you understand what your action means? Do you understand the trust that was broken in that moment?" Her words weren't shouted, but they landed heavily. He nodded quickly, unable to speak for a moment. His throat felt dry, his palms sweaty. "I know," he whispered. "I know I failed. Not just you. Not just the people who were watching. But everyone who believes we wear this uniform to protect, not to harm. I've shamed myself, my badge, and everything I stand for." The woman leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in thought. She could see the weight on him. She could hear the regret in his voice. But she also knew that regret wasn't enough. "You see," she began, her voice calm but firm, "every decision we make in uniform is magnified. Every mistake we make is multiplied. You didn't just act in front of a crowd, you acted in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, in front of the very people we are meant to serve. And tonight, those people saw something they should never have seen." The officer felt each word like a stone dropping into his chest. His mind raced, replaying the faces of the crowd, the gasps, the whispers. He had felt judged before, but never like this. The woman continued, "Authority is not about power. Authority is about responsibility. It is about self-control, patience, and the ability to stand calm even when the world is loud. Tonight, you lost that control. And because of that, people will question not only you, but all of us who serve." The officer closed his eyes for a moment. Her words pierced him, but he knew they were true. He had always told himself he was strong, that he could handle pressure. But now, faced with the truth, he realized how easily pressure had broken through his judgment. Tears welled in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. "I don't know how to make this right," he admitted quietly. "I don't know if I can." The woman watched him carefully. She didn't let emotion sway her judgment, but she also didn't ignore the humanity in front of her. She knew he was not the first officer to make a mistake, and sadly, not the last. But she also knew that how he responded to this mistake would define not only his future, but also the lesson others might learn from it. "You cannot undo what has already been done," she said slowly. "But you can decide what you do next. You can let this mistake destroy you, or you can let it transform you. The choice is yours." The officer looked up, his eyes red. Her words carried weight, but also something unexpected: hope. For the first time since the incident, he felt a small flicker of light in the darkness of his regret. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Another senior officer stepped inside, his expression tense. He had been briefed about the situation and knew it was already spreading quickly outside the station. He looked at the woman respectfully, then at the officer with concern. "We're going to need statements," the senior officer said. "There are reports already circulating. Videos are online. This is going to be difficult to contain." The woman nodded calmly. "I expected that." She turned to the officer. "You see? In today's world, nothing stays hidden. Every action is recorded, remembered, shared. That's why your responsibility is greater than ever. One moment of poor judgment can travel further than you imagine." The officer lowered his head again, his stomach tightening. He imagined headlines, angry comments, and endless criticism. He wasn't afraid of losing his job, he was afraid of losing his purpose, of being remembered for this one mistake rather than the years of service he had given. The woman saw the fear in his eyes. She chose her words carefully. "You are not defined by this single mistake. But you will be defined by how you respond to it. You cannot erase the videos. You cannot silence the voices. But you can show accountability, humility, and a willingness to change. That will matter more than silence or excuses." The officer nodded, slowly but firmly this time. For the first time, his posture shifted. His shoulders straightened, his breathing calmed. He wasn't free of guilt, but he was beginning to see a path forward. After the senior officer left, the room grew quiet again. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. "Do you know why I didn't raise my voice? Why I didn't shout back at you?" The officer shook his head, his eyes searching hers. "Because leadership is not about matching anger with anger. Leadership is about showing calm when others lose it. It's about teaching by example. If I had lost my control tonight, then what lesson would I have taught the people watching? That shouting solves shouting? That emotion should rule over reason? No. That is not leadership. And that is not justice." Her words struck him deeply. For years, he had thought that control meant strength, that authority meant firmness. But now, sitting across from her, he realized that true strength was in restraint, in patience, in the ability to hold back when emotions wanted to take over. As the night stretched on, their conversation grew deeper. He admitted his fears of failure, of not being good enough, of the pressure that never seemed to leave him. She listened, not as a victim, but as a leader guiding someone lost in their own mistakes. When the conversation finally ended, the officer felt drained but strangely lighter. He knew the road ahead would be hard. He knew there would be consequences, investigations, perhaps disciplinary action. But he also knew he had been given something priceless: a chance to learn, to change, to grow. The woman stood, gathering her things. She looked at him one last time before leaving the room. "Remember this night," she said. "Not as the night you failed, but as the night you were given a chance to understand what true responsibility means." As she walked out, her words echoed in his mind. For the first time, he felt that maybe this mistake, as painful as it was, could become the very thing that made him a better officer, and perhaps, a better man. The night at the station felt long, almost endless. The officer sat quietly at his desk, staring at his hands. The words of the woman echoed in his mind, "You cannot undo what has already been done. But you can decide what you do next." Those words replayed again and again, like a song he couldn't turn off. He was exhausted. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders slumped, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. He thought about his years of service, how proud he had been the day he first put on the uniform, how his family had looked at him with pride, how he had promised himself he would serve with honor. And now, all of that seemed to be hanging by a thread. The woman, the leader of ICE, had gone into another room for further discussions with senior officers. But before leaving him earlier, she had told him something that stuck deeply: "We will talk again. And when we do, I expect honesty, not excuses." Those words made him nervous, but also strangely hopeful. She had not shut the door completely. She had left space for something else, perhaps understanding, perhaps even redemption. Hours later, he was called into the conference room again. The woman was there, sitting calmly at the long wooden table. A few senior officers sat beside her, but it was clear she was the one leading the conversation. Her presence carried weight. The officer entered slowly, almost cautiously, and sat down. His heart thumped in his chest, but this time, he promised himself he would speak openly. No hiding. No excuses. She looked at him directly, her eyes steady but not unkind. "I want you to tell me again," she said. "Not just what happened. I want you to tell me why. Why did you let fear take over? Why did you let your judgment slip?" The officer inhaled deeply, gathering his courage. "I was tired," he began. "But tiredness isn't the full reason. The truth is, I've been carrying too much fear inside me. Every day, every call, I imagine the worst. I've let that fear control me. Tonight, when I saw you step forward, my mind didn't see you as someone helping. My mind saw you as another problem, another danger. And I reacted before I even thought." He paused, ashamed. "I let my own stress cloud my vision. I forgot that the people in front of me are humans first, not threats." The room was silent for a moment. The woman leaned back in her chair, studying him. His honesty was raw. She could tell he wasn't trying to defend himself, he was trying to understand himself. She finally spoke. "Do you realize how dangerous that mindset can be? If you see everyone as a problem, you will treat them like problems, not people. And when an officer does that, the whole system suffers. Trust is broken. Communities lose faith. And once faith is lost, it is hard to rebuild." Her words were steady, like a teacher guiding a student, but they struck hard. The officer nodded slowly. "I see that now. I didn't see it before, but I do now." Another senior officer in the room spoke up. "Do you think you can change? Do you think you can carry this lesson forward, not just for yourself, but for others?" The officer's voice grew steadier. "Yes. I want to. I don't want this to be the end of my story. I want it to be the beginning of a better one." The woman leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Words are easy. Change is hard. If you truly mean what you say, you will need to do more than apologize. You will need to act. You will need to show, not tell." The officer nodded again, this time more firmly. "I understand." Then something unexpected happened. Instead of listing punishments or consequences right away, the woman began to share a story of her own. She told him about her early years in service, about moments where she too had faced fear and doubt. She admitted that there were times when she had almost lost her temper, times when she had been pushed to the edge. "But," she said, "what separates a leader from the rest is not the absence of fear or anger. It is the choice not to let fear or anger lead the way. Leadership is choosing calm when everything inside you wants to explode. It is choosing patience when time feels short. It is choosing humanity when judgment wants to rush. Her words hit him like a wave. For the first time, he saw her not just as the leader of ICE, not just as someone powerful, but as a person who had walked a hard road too. She understood the pressure, the fear, the endless stress of carrying authority. But she had chosen a different path, a path of calmness, control, and responsibility. The officer listened intently, absorbing every word. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone was not just judging him, but teaching him. When she finished, she looked at him directly. "You made a mistake tonight. A serious one. But you also have a chance if you choose to take it. You can let this mistake define you in shame, or you can let it transform you into someone better. Which will it be?" The officer's chest rose and fell heavily. He looked down for a moment, then back up. "I don't want this mistake to be the end of me. I want it to be the lesson that changes me. I want to learn. I want to do better." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Then prove it. Not to me. Not to your colleagues. But to yourself. Because at the end of the day, you are the one who must live with your choices." The senior officers in the room looked at one another, surprised at her approach. Some had expected anger, punishment, maybe even a demand for immediate suspension. But she chose something different. She chose to give him a chance to rebuild himself. As the meeting came to an end, the woman stood. Her expression was still serious, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "We will watch you," she said firmly. "We will see how you carry this forward. Remember, every choice from here on will matter more than ever. Do not waste this chance." The officer stood as well, his legs heavy but his spirit a little lighter. He bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She didn't respond immediately, but as she turned to leave, she said, "Don't thank me yet. Thank yourself when you've proven you deserve it." That night, as the officer walked out of the station, the cool air brushed against his face. The city lights sparkled in the distance, the streets still alive with the usual hum of traffic and chatter. But for him, the world felt different. He felt as though a door had been opened, not a door of punishment, but a door of possibility. He knew the days ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, reports, maybe even public criticism. But he also knew he had been given something rare, a second chance. And this time, he would not waste it. The breakthrough had come not from defending himself, not from hiding, but from admitting the truth and opening his heart. He realized that sometimes the most powerful change begins in the quietest moments, moments of honesty, humility, and the courage to listen. And as he walked down the quiet street, he promised himself one thing: he would carry this lesson for the rest of his life. The days that followed were some of the hardest the officer had ever faced. News about the incident spread quickly, first on social media, then on local television, and eventually to national outlets. The videos recorded by bystanders were everywhere, each one showing the same moment from different angles. People debated online, some harshly criticizing him, others saying he had simply made a human mistake. The officer read none of it. He couldn't. The weight of what happened was already heavy enough without hearing every opinion. Inside the station, the atmosphere was different too. Some of his colleagues avoided looking at him, unsure of what to say. Others gave small nods of support, though their eyes carried questions they didn't ask. For the officer, every day felt like walking through a storm, but he reminded himself of what the woman had told him: you cannot erase the videos. You cannot silence the voices. But you can show accountability, humility, and a willingness to change. And so, he made a choice. Instead of running from what happened, instead of trying to bury it, he decided to face it. He began by volunteering for additional training programs, ones that focused not on tactics, but on communication, patience, and de-escalation. At first, some of his colleagues teased him quietly, saying he was only doing it to save face. But he didn't care. He knew deep inside that this was what he needed. Each training session taught him to pause, to breathe, to listen before reacting. Slowly, he began to rebuild not just his skills, but also his confidence. The woman, the leader of ICE, kept a close eye on his progress. She didn't interfere directly, but she asked for reports. She wanted to know if his words in that conference room matched his actions in real life. And as weeks turned into months, she began to hear stories of small but meaningful changes. One night, while on duty, the officer was called to another heated situation on the street. A group of young people had gathered outside a store, arguing loudly. The tension in the air reminded him of that night, the night his mistake had been captured on camera. His chest tightened, but this time, he remembered his training. He didn't rush. He didn't assume. He approached slowly, his voice calm, his words steady. He listened before acting. And instead of the situation spiraling out of control, it calmed down. The crowd dispersed peacefully. When he got back to his car, he sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the difference. This time, he hadn't let fear take over. This time, he had chosen patience over impulse. For the first time since that night, he felt a small spark of pride again, not pride in being perfect, but pride in learning. Word of his change began to spread, not through headlines, but through quiet conversations among his colleagues. Some of them started asking him about the new training, about the techniques he was learning. At first, he was hesitant to share he was still carrying the shame of his mistake. But then he realized that if his story could help others avoid the same path, then maybe that was the real purpose of everything he had gone through. So, he began speaking openly about what had happened. Not in a defensive way, not in a way that made excuses, but in a way that admitted fault and emphasized growth. "I made a mistake," he would say. "But I don't want anyone else to repeat it. If I can learn, so can you." His words carried more weight than a lecture, because they came from lived experience. Months later, the woman invited him to a leadership seminar she was hosting for officers across different departments. He was nervous when he received the invitation. Part of him still felt unworthy to stand in such a space. But when he walked into the seminar room, she greeted him with a nod of acknowledgement. Not approval, not forgiveness, acknowledgement. It was her way of saying, "I see the work you're doing." At the seminar, she spoke to the group about responsibility, about leadership, about the true meaning of authority. And then, to his surprise, she asked him to share his story. His heart pounded in his chest. Dozens of officers looked at him, waiting. For a moment, he felt the old shame return. But then he remembered that this was not about shame anymore, it was about learning. So he stood up and spoke. He told them about the night on the street, about the mistake that had nearly broken him, about the conversation that had changed him, and about the journey of growth that followed. He didn't hide anything. He spoke openly, humbly, and honestly. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then, slowly, a few officers nodded. Some even clapped softly. They didn't see him as a failure, they saw him as someone who had faced failure and chosen to grow from it. The woman looked at him with calm eyes. She didn't smile widely, but there was a softness in her expression, a quiet approval. It was enough. From that day on, the officer continued to share his story whenever he could. He became known not just as someone who had made a mistake, but as someone who had turned that mistake into a lesson. His journey reminded others that being an officer wasn't about being perfect, it was about being human, about learning, about striving to do better every single day. And as for the woman, her leadership was praised widely. People admired the way she handled the situation, not with anger, not with punishment alone, but with wisdom, patience, and a deep understanding of what true authority means. she had turned what could have been a scandal into a lesson for many. In the end, both of their lives were changed. The officer carried his lesson for the rest of his career, never forgetting the night that had almost ruined him but instead became the night that reshaped him. And the woman continued to lead with strength and calmness, showing the world that real power lies not in reacting, but in responding with wisdom. The story spread quietly, not as a headline about disgrace, but as a reminder of growth. People who heard it reflected on their own lives about moments when they, too, had let fear or stress cloud their judgment, and how they might choose differently in the future. The officer never forgot her final words to him that night in the station: "Remember this night. Not as the night you failed, but as the night you were given a chance to understand what true responsibility means." Those words became his guiding star, reminding him that mistakes do not have to end a story, they can begin a new chapter. And so, the story that began with shock and regret ended with reflection and renewal. It became more than just the tale of an officer and a leader, it became a lesson about humanity, accountability, and the power of second chances.